Cape Verde is the new location reported for United States ship Gerald Ford. It took a full week to travel across the coast of northwestern Africa, and it remains in North Atlantic close to Africa, just a little further south than Morocco, as it is now in Cape Verde. However, this slight move follows a mediatic experience designed to exasperate buoyancy and enthusiasm of warmongers who applaud that USS ship Gerald Ford finally arrived to the realms of Southcom. Yes, Southcom easternmost boundary is Atlantic waters close to Cape Verde. As soon as the aircraft carrier USS ship Gerald Ford entered easternmost border of Southcom, it was immediately announced that it was able to travel a few miles south. Cape Verde is far enough from the Caribbean, and as long as it remains in that area, there should be no worry. However, reports express intended destination toward the Caribbean operations, while the most elucubrated destination would be east of Trinidad and Tobago, north of Guyana, and close to the Atlantic façade of Venezuela in Delta Amacuro state. Venezuelan military forces most fortify Delta Amacuro and Bolivar states, as invasion could arrive from Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago into Essequibo onto Bolívar and Delta Amacuro. We are not there yet, as USS Gerald Ford advances slowly. In diplomatic terms, it looks like Southcom may now provide a welcome party of USS Gerald Ford into its domain, while Donald Trump may continue his favorite ambiguous behavior of really not knowing what to do. As usual, we have several reports from Russia. The State Duma, which is the Congress or Assembly of Russia, wrote with concern that United States military operations in the Caribbean are intolerable and unacceptable, as the lives of civilian fishermen are being destroyed by extrajudicial procedures, that the Caribbean should get back into a zone of peace, and that further United States military deployment into Caribbean possibly signal the specific incursion of USS Gerald Ford would entail explosive escalation. It must also be noted that USS Newport News and two others have discreetly left the Caribbean, meaning that the number of troops deployed there may actually be diminishing from the original 16,000 count, as the 6,000 troops located in USS Gerald Ford have already been counted in long ago. Perhaps Donald Trump still needs a few more days to create a suitable narrative to call this whole nonsense off. Meanwhile, we shall continue checking position of USS Gerald Ford at all times. Positioning of USS Gerald Ford has become a proxy of guessing whether Third World War will be initiated or not. It is absolutely clear that the drug interdiction activities, while official on paper, are no longer believed by anyone, and the United States is increasingly interested in provoking a regime change in Venezuela. However, Venezuelans are 90% against military invasion. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez spoke today about daily activities professionally performed by Venezuelan armed forces, and he dismisses this whole operation of United States military in the Caribbean as a distraction from United States domestic political problems. Minister of Defense Padrino Lopez could not ascertain reasons for withdrawal from the Southern Command of its admiral. However, he is completely sure that there is intense infighting across the United States Army and Navy due to lack of clear objectives and accusations of crimes of war, as killing civilians on speedboats is not authorized by international community. So, will we arrive into a dialogue for peace, or will we enter war? A dialogue for peace would require a bilateral meeting between either President Donald Trump or Secretary of State Marco Rubio with presidents of Venezuela Nicolás Maduro, Cuba Miguel Díaz-Canel, and Nicaragua Daniel Ortega. United States is horrified at the idea of having to dialogue to presidents of nations it despises. Therefore, the most likely scenario would be that, once again, United States refuses dialogue with Latin American countries and just resumes military obsession. Problem is that United States military is no longer intimidating. Venezuela's level of preparation has become so fabulous and abundant in help from Russia, China, and Iran that Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was interviewed today, and he was asked about Venezuela's request, as portrayed by Western media, of Russian military equipment. And Foreign Minister Lavrov said that he had no information about any additional requests made by Venezuela, meaning that Venezuela has already received everything they need and there was no need to a last-minute panic commissioning for weapons as planning made since the Hugo Chavez era decades ago have been accumulating on schedule. Plane loads with Russian equipment that are arriving to Caracas airport quite frequently have already been planned long ago and do not entail any emergency supplies, as Western media would like us to believe that Venezuelans were in a hurry trying to save our lives at the last minute. In contrast, everything was actually pre-planned in advance. So, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov concluded that Venezuela has not asked for anything, as the Russian-Venezuelan Treaty of Alliance is so complete that all requirements were already set in advance, not only for military, but also for cultural, economic, energetic, and strategic relations. However, we still must assess the two remaining possibilities. Either United States withdraws its forces from the Caribbean, or United States initiates Third World War. No middle ground is expected, as pressure campaigns of United States sending dozens of ships into Venezuela with economic warfare, with psychological warfare, and with military showman Hollywoodesque fake fear, none of that has made Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, or Cubans budge. 90% of the population supporting deterrence against war is unprecedented in a country which used to be politically divided in a polarization that was supposed to be half and half. Extremism has decayed because, understandably, most people of any nationality will not support an invasion against your own country, which has been the narrative imposed by United States-led opposition of Venezuela. So, going back to the existential dilemma of United States: to invade or to initiate World War III, or to withdraw from the Caribbean. Actually, invading and initiating World War III are equivalent, because up to this point, wars in Gaza and Ukraine were signaled as regional conflicts in Eastern Europe or Western Asia, which are not too far away from each other. Actually, Russia and Israel share the same time zone, or they have 1 hour difference, and they are both north of Tropic of Cancer, and they are both south of the Arctic Polar Circle. So yes, Ukraine and Gaza are geographically close in planetary terms, while Venezuela and the Caribbean are at the other half of the world, and if it gets invaded by United States forces, relocation of weapons will be redeployed between Western Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America, and the Caribbean. And as Pete Hegseth said, this was a 1939 moment. It looks like World War III is about to initiate. We are just waiting for invasion into Venezuela, for a conclusive textbook initiation date of World War III. World wars are usually led by Nazi countries such as Nazi Hitler Germany or Donald Trump's USA, or Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel, or Volodymyr Zelensky's Ukraine. All of them started wars due to racial supremacist intentions. We must remember that Since 2014, Volodymyr Zelensky has tried to change the culture and language of eastern Ukraine's oblasts such as Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporizhia. Those eastern oblasts of Ukraine were suffering horrendous human rights violations, including prohibition of expressing themselves in Russian language, as they were supposed to speak and write in Ukrainian, until Vladimir Putin and the Russian population decided it was to their best interest to recover such lost territory in 2022 through the special operations. So World War III has been going on for quite some time as a prelude, but it looks like it will go in full fight as United States actively tries to get a piece of the warring pie. Venezuela is supposed to be a banana republic with poor communist stupid population that will be afraid because United States is resorting to economic war, psychological war, and military fanfaria of Miss Universe sceneries of beauty worships. United States can show all the force it wants. Venezuelans are prepared to receive them. We have missiles, we have radars, we have aircraft, we have ships, and we have allies. Colombia is an ally, Nicaragua, Cuba, China, North Korea, Iran, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Yemen. Venezuela has plenty of allies everywhere. Venezuela's allies have learned how to fight the United States during many decades, and Venezuelans are just too happy to learn from our allies' experiences so that we do not repeat mistakes. As non-aligned movement countries are determined in granting Venezuela the honor and privilege of defeating United States in its last imperialistic war. This determination may take years of World War III, because if United States invades, even though it will be costly, they might just print Federal Reserve money for financing deaths, but Venezuelans will resist for as long as it takes, because we will not accept a United States suggested dictatorial government prepared to loot our resources in favor of multinational corporations friendly to Donald Trump. Venezuela has not been designed for such humiliation. However, United States does not look like it wants to engage in a multi-year war. And it's not only Venezuela, it is also Nicaragua and Cuba. All of us are receiving plenty of Russian weapons simultaneously. We are designing an intelligence structure and air cooperation so that spaces safely traveled by United States Navy in the Caribbean are shrinking, considering that Venezuela's territorial waters are extensive and border many countries. Venezuela is the sixth country in the whole world with most international borders. Venezuela borders with Colombia, Brazil, Guyana, Netherlands Antilles, France, Great Britain, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, and St. Kitts and Nevis, and the Dominican Republic, and the United States through Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands. Venezuela's international borders are plentiful. We exert sovereignty in a clearly defined area of the Caribbean. However, in the next few days, we will need to be extremely careful on what could happen to the Venezuelan Atlantic façade, because Delta Amacuro state is where Orinoco River ends. It has its own Atlantic façade, but it could be likely that if the United States militarily deploys USS ship Gerald Ford into Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, they might well intend to deprive Venezuela from our Atlantic façade, which holds gas resources of Cocuina, Dorado, Lorán, Plataforma Deltana 3, and Plataforma Deltana 5. We shall be monitoring this with great care. There is not ample information on the arrival of Russian ships, even though there have been a lot of comments on the issue. Military sources are usually tricky to find. They are mostly confidential and they disclose little bullets. There is a general sense that we should engage into explosive escalation as USS Gerald Ford continues traveling south into Trinidad and Tobago, which could end British pretension since the 18th and 19th century to deprive us of even further territory. We must remember that Trinidad was part of the Captaincy General of Venezuela during the Spanish Crown. Trinidad was attacked by Great Britain and ceased to be Venezuelan. And the Essequibo region started being conquered by the British until they forced Venezuela to accept the 1899 Paris Arbitral Award. With this history of United States, United Kingdom complicity, as United States pretended to be a friend of Venezuela through the Monroe Doctrine, but in reality they just made a deal with the English so that the Paris court could award Great Britain most of the Essequibo. The story is repeated now as United States, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago would be eager to invade Venezuela from Delta Amacuro state if USS Gerald Ford goes south into eastern Trinidad or northern Guyana or even northern Delta Amacuro. That area is close to Stabroek oil fields managed by Guyana and the Venezuelan Plataforma Deltana. Venezuelans must fight. We must defend our territory. It would not be palatable that resources that we always wanted to use for the benefit of the Venezuelan population would suddenly become a factory of a multinational that happens to be a friend of Donald Trump. For the time being, Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua stand firm together with some help of Russia, while the United States provides a lot of pressure. However, we are immune to pressure because our two options are either full withdrawal from the Caribbean, or United States will have to assume the cost of full-blown invasion, as Venezuelans will not budge through pressure.